Good evening. In this broadcast, the information program Time. Between the federal forces and Dudaev supporters today, an agreement on ceasefire was reached. Information agencies began to report this news in the afternoon, and although by evening it became clear that the agreement concerned a ceasefire only in the use of heavy types of weapons, this fact leaves hope for, if not peace, then at least a truce. According to official reports of the press service of the government of Russia, such an agreement was reached at the first level of talks, and that means there will be a second. For the time being, Anatoly Kulikov, who is the head of the group of the Russian federal forces in Chechnya, and he headed the Russian side at the dialogues. And directly from the site of the talks, he issued orders to stop firing from heavy weapons. Other details of the dialogues in the report of our special correspondent, Mikhail Zotov. At the airport near the Cossack village Slitsovskaya, with the mediation of the government of the Republic Ingushetia, talks were held between the Russian General Kulikov and the commander of the headquarters of the armed forces of the Chechnya Republic, Aslam Matsadov. The talks were held behind closed doors over the course of 2 hours with the mediation of the Vice President of Ingushetia, Boris Agapov. On mutual agreement, patrol of the venue of talks was conducted by the soldiers of the internal forces and Chechen insurrectionists. After the talks, the film crew of Ostankino managed to ask a few questions of the General Kulikov. According to him, the Russian troops will soon be withdrawn from Grozny to be replaced by internal affairs detachments. Assessing the results of the talks today, Aslam Matsadov said to a correspondent of the program Time, "We've already given the order. Perhaps it is not being complied with in all sectors of positions. They have stopped shooting, and now we have reached unanimous agreement. First of all, to stop shooting from heavy types of weapons. That is, in other words, we have agreed right now on a time frame until the day after tomorrow. And hence, as of this evening, the sides will carefully follow compliance with the agreement. The day after tomorrow, possibly, a meeting will be held here together, which is being kept secret from the journalists." Possibly the talks were the reason for the relative calm which was observed today in the region of combat, including Grozny. At the same time, the press service of the government of Russia reported continuing redislocation of gunmen from Grozny to Gudermes, but in this city, the citizens held a rally where they demanded to dismiss the Dudaev prefect, Raduev. Also, their headquarters was set up to establish order and to expel gunmen outside the city parameters. Latest reports from locations where for more than 2 months war has been underway indicate that the Chechen side continues for defense of Gudermes, the Republic's second-largest city. Dudaev supporters, according to the press service of the Russian government, are evicting local residents from populated points, Sevnaotsk, Samashka, and are redeploying units and weapons to that location from the point Orджоникидзевskaya. Internal affairs forces and organs of internal affairs continue the disarmament operation in the October region, and in the Cossack village Asinovskaya, aviation was bombing in the area of the points Novoprisal and Argun. They've annihilated the contingency command point of Dudaev. At the same time, the presence of missile forces of strategic the press center of the Missile Forces of Strategic Designation calls the statements of Chechen leaders provocational about the possibility of using missile fuel in the Republic in the capacity of poisonous substances. According to the Chechen side, this was announced by Interfax, that Dudaev supporters since the beginning of combat lost 550 in casualties and over 3,000 injured. Meanwhile, last week the head of the Russian General Staff said that the Russian forces annihilated 6,700 of the enemy's commandos. No matter what the figure, one can believe unequivocally there is 219,706,000. This, according to Federal Immigration Services, is the number of registered refugees from Chechnya. On the backdrop of the protracted Chechen crisis, sociologists from week to week state that the longer the Chechen war lasts, the more it compromises the intellectual elite of Russia. However, in the opinion of several political scientists, to declare a Cold War against the government in this regard is as senseless and dangerous as to continue the combat, because political barricades in our country have already escalated before into armed barricades. In Grozny and those parts occupied by federal forces, attempts are being made to restore peaceful daily life, but this is extremely complicated because the center of the city has become ruins. Extensively demolished are buildings on the right bank of the Sunja River, where, for a long time, the Chechen insurrection maintained a defensive stronghold. Interfax reports that currently the posts of Russian forces located there to date do not recommend that citizens go out onto the Minutka Square because the situation there is not not yet fully under the control of Russian forces. This is how many of the Grozny streets look today. The destruction is massive. Not only were the administrative buildings damaged, but residential homes. People are returning to the city already. The new executive power, which is headed by Nikolai Ivanovich Semyonov, is attempting to alleviate the demise of these people and restore a peaceful life in the city. But this is an extremely difficult task because in Grozny, snipers are still shooting, and during the night automatic rounds are heard. The main effort today should be concentrated on resolving those issues in those regions and micro-regions of the Republic and micro-regions of the city, which can be restored most quickly. Today I met with the employees of the Ministry of the Transportation Department, and we decided that the road and transportation traffic will be restored in a minimum time frame, let's say in the Nat-Terech region. Bridges will be restored and road surfaces, etc. Today we examined tasks, the tasks of restoring the northern airport. We must gain control over running the airport now, and we feel that the interim government is acting very loyally, having divided the city into these administrative parcels. And through these structures, we can quickly, involving people, conduct restorational work. The residents of the Cossack village Goluzhaevskaya on the territory of Stavropol Rim lived in accord and harmony with their neighbors for centuries. The river Terek, which flows through the villages and the Chechen villages Bratskaya and Yubilena, never was an impediment for friendship or understanding between people. For years, it has been habitual for basically Chechens will frequent and inhabit the region, always aiding each other, celebrated at their common weddings. In a word, they lived as neighbors should. But the war in Chechnya introduced its own corrections into the established order of life. Currently, the villagers, with alarm and apprehension, wait for darkness to fall. In circumvention of fortified posts of federal forces carrying out their duty on the border between Chechnya and Stavropol, the Dudaev gunmen crossed the Terek with the aim of replenishing food supplies. Luckily, there have been no terrorist acts or provocations to date. Although true, a helicopter of the Russian forces by mistake fired at a dairy merchant farm. Luckily, there were no casualties. The National Assembly of Estonia adopted a statement today on realizing the right of the Chechen people for self-definition. In this statement, there is a decisive protest expressed against the continuing interference of Russia into the affairs of the Chechen Republic. The Estonian deputies recommended that their government recognize the Chechen Republic and Czechia at the first possible opportunity when the international situation permits. The unique position of Estonia regarding recognizing the independence of Chechnya is nothing more than interference in the internal affairs of Russia. Andrei Kozyrev stated, commenting on the decision of Estonian parliamentarians, according to Kozyrev, this decision evokes nothing more than regret. The level of division of the Moscow press in approaches to events in Chechnya was felt by Anatoly Vengerov through the reaction to his statement made today that the military are not impeding journalists' work among the troops and the Dudaev propaganda mongers have succeeded in their objectives. To refute the fact that in 3 years, Dudaev created a certain structure for information supply for his separatist activity is impossible. At the same time, the chairman of the Judiciary Chamber on Information Disputes called the accusations unfounded about the bribery of Russian press by Dudaev envoys. In the opinion of Anatoly Vengerov, Russian authorities were absolutely unprepared to illuminate the Chechen crisis, and this one may conclude from the unsatisfactory work of the government's press service in the first phases of the operation. Noting that on newspaper pages and television screens, often unreliable information seeps through, Anatoly Vengerov stated that the military and the journalists both were hindered in their duties in the conflict zone by the absence of a precise legal assessment of the military operation in Chechnya. The Constitutional Court, which was in a state of suspension for so long, finally began its work. At today's session, they've elected a chairman. He is the 69-year-old Vladimir Tumanov. The response to the traditional question, and who is he? Briefly, it is as follows. The honored scientist, member of the Committee of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly on Legislation, an active member of the International Academy of Comparative Law, the Doctor of Juridical Sciences, and professor. During the first interview, it became clear that the new justices remember the sad experience of their predecessors and are in no rush to become involved in big politics. We've had quite a long break and pause, and we must first familiarize ourselves with matters. The most important thing is that we must further the election process. The initial time will be organizational matters. Yet political conversation, Chechnya, could not be avoided. It became apparent that the Constitutional Court may examine documents and normative acts, but we cannot comment on actions or on specific events. This would mean the same thing as already happened once. And repetition is truly the mother of learning. Scientists and judges will not be involved in matters which they themselves initiate. In the opinion of Tumanov, this could lead to the absolute power of the Constitutional Court because no one can abolish its decisions. All cases will be examined in a strictly sequential manner. Incidentally, for urgent cases, possibly exceptions will be made. Will an exception be made in the inquiry on Chechnya, which should come today from the Federative Council? It's not yet known. You must read. A lawyer who hasn't read the paper will never give you any worthwhile advice. Today, the Deputy Chairman of the Constitutional Court was also appointed. He is the Doctor of Juridical Sciences, Tamara Marshikova. The Deputy Minister of Defense of Russia, Boris Gromov, today, by presidential decree, was reassigned to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation in the capacity of the military expert to execute special assignments. Commenting on this appointment, the head of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Kozyrev, said that in this sphere of Gromov's competence will be relations with NATO, questions of strategic stability in Europe, and also military cooperation with the CIS countries. President Yeltsin intends to touch on questions of military reform in his annual address to the Federal Assembly. Today he embarked on the review of the final text of that document, and this work will be the main aspect of the President's activity until the very day of the address, that is the 16th of February. According to Interfax, in the address, more than 100 problems will be examined. The President intends to do a critical analysis of the military approach to resolving the Chechen problem. In the economic portion of the address, there is a theme contained that in the current turning point year, the economy should transform from an inflationary one into an investment economy. The summary of the last year and economic policy of the government, topics of today's speech of the Economics Minister, Yevgeny Yasin, to representatives of local legislative organs of rule. The decline continues, and in 1994, it was even deeper than in 1993. At the same time, Yevgeny Yasin feels that there is nothing tragic in this situation, and it's natural for a period of a transition to a market economy. In Yasin's opinion, in separate sectors, for example, the processing sector, there will be no further decline because they've hit the bottom already. A major failure is possible in the fuel energy sector and agricultural industry. The government is actively seeking extraordinary measures to prevent this. The government's top priority this year, Yasin feels, is the fight with inflation and achieving financial stability. The year will be quite difficult, and mostly it will be difficult for producers. I still hope that the standard of living overall will not fall. According to Yasin, the Federal Assembly created a difficult time for the government in deciding to increase minimum salaries. That means that they have to find somewhere 53 trillion rubles, in the local governments 100 trillion more. No one knows from whence. Therefore, Yasin's opinion is that the president is forced to make an unpopular decision because he'll evidently have to veto this resolution. Economic problems in each Russian region have their own specifics. In the northern regions, they grow proportionately with the distance from the center. That area is inhabited by 11 million Russians. Therefore, it's necessary to define what the government expects from the north and on what its residents can count on. The resolution of this was the target of the meeting held with the union heads of the northern territories and the vice premier, Sergei Shakharai. The north is 2/3 of the territory of Russia. If in the summer all necessary is not delivered, food, oil and coal, life there is impossible. In 1994, the government allotted to the northerners 7 trillion rubles. In 1995, as Sergei Shakharai noted, from the budget, only the delivery of energy to the north will be financed. announced. Money will not be handed out in Moscow to an intermediary, but directly to the heads of the subjects of the Federation, earmarked for designation. What was discussed by the Vice Premier will be taken into account in the end of February, when the government will examine the resolution on the manner for the northern deliveries in 1995. The rate of the ruble against the American dollar today in trading at the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange fell by 15 points. The dollar is worth 4,206 rubles. The purchase of wheat, which was begun by the company Kuban Bread Product, is only ripening in the fields. And according to forward transactions, that is, before planting, more than 300,000 tons has been acquired. It would seem that what is the difference for consumers when to buy wheat? It's an enormous one, because for grain bought in February, 300 rubles per kilogram is spent, and in autumn, according to specialists, it will cost 500 to 600. Toward this aim, to make bread cheaper for the consumers, the administration of the Krasnodar Rim issued a resolution to form a regional fund today and allotted the first installment, 50 billion rubles, for that goal. And the peasants, the grain producers, are such deals lucrative for them? I think so, because having received real money back in the beginning of the year, they'll have time to purchase everything necessary to continue: technology, seeds, and fuel. It's even beneficial for those farms which have found themselves in debt and are on credit index cards in the bank. Today in Kuban, probably it's the least expensive bread in the country. If compared with the capital, it's 2.5 times cheaper. The grain was purchased through advanced transactions in February of last year at prices then. Bread, which is being bought now, Kuban will consume in the year 1996, but at today's prices, that means, again, it's cheaper. In January, prices for Russian energy sources have jumped by 27%. Interfax reports that coal jumped the most, by 54%, and this was immediately sensed by the fuel consumers. These letters and telegrams are a cry for aid. The delivery of coal has ceased to municipal steam heating stations for the population. People suffer and are ill in unheated apartments because of no money for the purchase of coal. Heating is shut down to residential developments and entire villages. Coal is too expensive if it's brought in from Russia through Lithuania and Belarus. However, the local firm Bare managed to save the administration $600,000 by importing coal at 30% less without tax on surcharge as provided in a special presidential decree. But even now, it's forced to stop delivery. By the decision and decree of the president on the Kaliningrad district, considering the unique economic and geographic situation of our district, it's clearly defined that goods imported into the Kaliningrad district are exempt from paying tax on added cost. The Tax Inspection Department is attempting to keep hold on us for this tax on the added cost and is acting in violation of the decree of the president. Bureaucrats act on the instructions of their own departments without complying with presidential's direct action decrees. Also, many other laws of the country are not complied with. Why? It's simple. The law hinders the absolute power of the bureaucrat. Customs barriers separate the Kaliningrad district from neighboring Lithuania, but alas, they won't become barriers in the path of natural disaster. Our personal correspondent from Lithuania reports about flooding in Lithuania. Extensive thawing accompanied by rains caused the flooding waters to rise in the Lithuanian water bodies. In the lower part of the Nenman River, a large stretch of the Shilutyrusna road has flooded. Water levels are 75 centimeters high. Underwater is 25,000 hectares of garden homesteads and other agricultural lands. Now isolated are 164 farms with more than 600 people. Food for the citizens of the villages are brought in by amphibious vehicles. Telecommunications contact is being established. The situation is being followed by rescue services and civil protection services. In Neman and other rivers, unfrozen patches of water in the ice appeared. The ice is also breaking in the Kursk Gulf, which may lower the water levels, but will it alleviate matters for the residents of this part of Lithuania, who in recent years are more and more at the mercy of natural cataclysms? The 13th of February, 1945, our forces took Budapest. The 200,000-strong German garrison was demolished and its remainder laid down its weapons. Tired, exhausted victors enjoyed the calm and the possibility to walk through the streets completely upright. Those who were lucky enough to live to this day will remember it forever. Not a single European capital, except for Berlin, cost such sacrifice and blood as this beautiful, poetic city on the banks of the Danube River. The storm of Budapest continued for almost 3.5 months. 2 times, the advance of our forces was choked in its own blood at the access to the limits of the Hungarian capital. The Germans turned the city into an inaccessible fortress. Each building, street and block had to be taken with a skirmish. In the semi-demolished buildings, thousands of individual crossfire rounds would flare up. Defenders of the city fought with the despair of a person who was doomed. In Europe, Hungary was the last and most loyal ally of Hitler Germany. For more than 20 years, the country was run by fascist dictator Admiral Hoxha. In June of 1941, he sent 18 Hungarian divisions into the advance on Russia. Here they did the same thing as all other occupiers do. They pillaged, looted, burned and killed. The majority of these divisions were destroyed in the bloody clashes at Stalingrad and Voronezh. And when the war turned about face completely, German forces, with Hoxha's approval, occupied Hungary. In Budapest, German soldiers were greeted with chocolate and homemade wine. Their bravado inspired tenderness and exhilaration among the locals. Everyone was in a marvelous mood. In any case, they thought that they would surrender the city to the British, but everything turned out otherwise. The valor, endurance, and remarkable strength of will of our soldier again foiled the plan of the Hitler command. In Budapest, utterly destroyed was the steel concrete power of the group of the South Army. The Pearl of the Danube, Budapest is called by its admirers an entire complex of buildings on the right bank. UNESCO has included in a world list of architectural treasures. Hungarians love their city. They're proud of it and will add they preserve it while sharing its complicated history and fate with it. Today, it's difficult to imagine that 50 years ago on this day, Budapest was a mountain of rubble. For 2 months, the siege of Budapest went on. Stepping back to the right bank of the river, the fascists blew up all the bridges, each of which was the decoration of the city. The Allies' aviation bombed the capital incessantly. 75% of the buildings were damaged and more than 1/3 completely demolished. Our command attempted to not destroy the buildings with heavy artillery as much as possible, although each one of them the enemy had turned into a fortress. As a consequence of that, tens of thousands of Soviet soldiers in the street clashes. So the price of victory was extremely high. These days, they remember all the sacrifices of that war, whether the identities of the casualties were established or whether not. All of those who fell in the siege of Budapest then brought closer the day of the final victory over fascism with their labor. Today in Petersburg, a meeting was held at the Heroes of the Soviet Union and the full Knights of the Order of Glory, dedicated to the impending 50th anniversary of victory. Memories. Today, almost 5 decades after the great victory, oppresses the hearts of veterans. 300 heroes of the Soviet Union and holders of the highest order of glory who fought in different fronts, losing friends in the dugouts, came to the Piskarovskaya Memorial Cemetery. Here under the snow-covered hills in common tombs, hundreds of thousands of warriors and citizens who died during the 900-day blockade sleep the eternal sleep. Wreaths, crimson carnations are laid to the feet of the monument of the Mother of the Homeland. With a moment of silence, they honored the bright memory of the fallen. At the anniversary assembly, the President of Russia's greeting to the assembly was read, and the veterans were addressed by the Chairman of the Council of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, Vladimir Shumeyka. Today in Dresden, a function is being held dedicated to the 50th anniversary of the bombing of the city by the Anglo-American aviation. More than half a century ago, Dresden, in less than an hour, was turned into ruins. 35,000 died then. On the common tombs where their remains rest, wreaths were laid by representatives of the public, the armed forces, politicians from the United States, Great Britain, and the Federal Republic of Germany. The head of the Russian government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, flew to Bratislava today. He intends to discuss one of the most intense problems in Russian-Slovak relations there, the disproportionate balance in the foreign trade turnover between the two countries. The first visit of the Russian premier to Bratislava began in complete fog. Nonetheless, the unfavorable weather didn't interfere with the entire protocol seminary. At the airport, Viktor Chernomyrdin was met by the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Vladimir Michiar. One must say that on the economic backdrop of Eastern Europe, Slovakia has found itself separated. In separating from the Czech Republic, it lost its basic productivity capabilities and was severed from international contacts. Because all of the offices were located in Prague, and therefore here much had to be begun from scratch. And to help keep afloat were economic ties with Russia, especially in the area of energy. We deliver 5 million tons of oil to this part, and the transit of gas through Slovakia brings the Republic more currency than the entire foreign trade with Russia. At dialogues with the government, first on a one-to-one basis and then with the members of the delegations, they discussed further steps to broaden cooperation. Today, Russia sells Slovakia 4 times more than it buys, and the profit is directed not to purchase local goods, but to service its foreign debt. Slovakia wanted to even out that situation and broaden export into our country. Incidentally, during the short briefing, the premiers didn't dwell on that topic, but they stopped on the documents prepared in advance, the signing of which was demonstrated to the journalists. Among them, especially emphasized was the two-sided agreement on the levels of cities and companies, the framework agreement on cooperation in the areas of culture, education and science, and also the multi-million contract to create an aviation engine. Viktor Chernomyrdin held a business meeting with the president of Slovakia, Michal Kovic. In general, it's quite evident that the Russian-Slovak relations managed to remain on a friendly level after the collapse of the bloc economic network. In many foreign trade institutions, graduates of Russian higher academies are employed. The Russian language is not forgotten. The local population is somewhat concerned over the not-so-much seen as heard Russian mafia. However, economic interests, and especially the Russian market, are far more important. The conflict between Peru and Ecuador is gradually growing into a full-scale war. Peru is deploying new forces in the combat zone, rejecting Ecuador's truce offer. Both sides are implementing aviation more broadly in a clash for the disputed stretch of border in the Amazon area. The truce disrupted by the Muslims in western Bosnia was only another breather between more clashes. The Serbs and Muslims continue to wipe out each other, especially intense fighting is underway near the town Bosanska Krupa. According to UN military observers, there a veritable hell has developed. Serb forces are attempting to get through to Bihać, the center of the enclave with the same name, and the Muslims in essence have to fight on two fronts, against the Serbs and against their own from the regiments of the rebel General Abdic. This general is attempting to create his own Muslim autonomy in the Bihać enclave. The administration of Bill Clinton warned Moscow that the possible sale by Russia of nuclear reactors to Iran could worsen relations between the White House and the Kremlin. In the opinion of the United States, such a transaction would be in contravention to the American policy on not aiding terrorists. A general national strike was started by the employees of the largest Italian air company, Alitalia. The strike is a protest against the plans of the administration to reduce expenditures. The company plans to reduce its expenditures through decreasing the salary fund. The labor conflict in Alitalia will be discussed by the Ministerial Council of the country. Chinese traders of computers, cosmetics and cigarettes unexpectedly found themselves in the front line of an American-Chinese trade war. It hasn't yet begun, but the front line and objects of attack are described extremely precisely. These goods made in America will be subjected in China to a 100% customs duty starting the 26th of February, the date when the United States intends to levy its own punitive sanctions against Chinese import. The conflict was precipitated by the stalemate in the two-sided talks on the problem of complying with copyright laws in China. The United States feels that despite an entire package of laws, intellectual property in China has become a widespread business involving private and state structures. Washington's proposal to close such companies and to receive real guarantees on observing copyright law in Beijing they reject as unreasonable. China, as officials say, has already done much in this area, and one can't demand from China a level of protection of intellectual property as in developed countries. For this, time is needed. Experts calculate what the American-Chinese trade battle could cost, but already it's clear that it won't bypass Chinese neighbors, who on that continent financed companies oriented toward export to the United States. Calming their partners with abundance of other markets, China nonetheless is keeping the doors open in the dialogues with the United States because for it, the result of this conflict, apart from the material expression, has a political subtext. In essence, that is the fate of Beijing's broadly advertised policy of attracting high technologies, which, as is known in international practice, to hand over without the proper copyright protection is broadly not accepted. The level of manufacturing in Russia doesn't permit it today to actively compete with leading producers of the world. Nonetheless, it's much more pleasant when domestic firms and companies present their goods at international fairs and exhibits and with full justification expect commercial success. In Moscow, on the Krasnopresna, a unique gastronome opened today is astounding in dimensions and and also in the abundance of products offered. However, only wholesalers may shop here. This is the second international fair of prepared and unprepared raw material food ingredients and foods. It's organized by the Expo Center and attracted more than 800 firms, companies, and other organizations from almost 40 countries. Here, as in any other gastronome, import goods prevail and are dominant. These are famous cheeses from France, wines from Italy, sausage products from Germany and Denmark, and goods of the Russian companies and firms is lost in this ocean of imported abundance. However, it's joyful that it's there nonetheless. Almost 150 domestic participants of this fair offer their goods which meet all world standards. An example of that could be the display of the Joint Stock Association Doka bread. Here equipment is presented to bake bread and pizza, which has acquired a taste here. Our equipment is no worse than the Western equipment in quality, design and reliability, but the only shortcoming is that it's 10 times cheaper. The fact that this equipment bakes excellent bread and pizza each can be convinced of by visiting this exhibit, which will go on till the 19th of February. Tomorrow at the newsstands and kiosks, another issue of the magazine Огонек, The Flame, will appear. That's not an event, but it's news because the famous magazine will be thicker with a change in format and content. Why is it so small? This morning, picking up the latest issue of the magazine, which is now printed in Finland, the editor-in-chief of Огонек, Lev Gushin, exclaimed the same thing. This is a complicated feeling. I think that all readers will have to endure that feeling. It will be unusual. There will be an adjustment period, but people get used to good things quickly. The fate of the Flame magazine was always connected with the fate of the country. But the magazine parts with the image of a Soviet and post-Soviet publication, as was stated at the press conference in the Slavianskaya Hotel. Political turbulence, which was the instrument in putting a spark to the flame, will fade into the shadows. In the spotlight, only the human will remain with all his problems of inner and outer existence. The Flame intends to be Russia's first illustrated weekly publication and will be geared to the regular middle-class citizen, the new magazine for old Russians. Now the magazine will be sold in all major cities of Russia on just the same day as it is in the capital. It seems that again we've seen the bright fire of the flame at the end of the tunnel. Good evening. In the sixth meet of the semi-final match of the rivals for the World Championship title, Anatoly Karpov, with the white figures, has beat Boris Gelfand and leads in the match 3.5 by 2.5 points. The sixth match between Valery Salov and Gato Kamsky has been postponed at the 61st move. Kamsky is ahead for now 4-1. The American speed skater Bonnie Blair has set a new world record on the 500-meter distance at the World Cup tournament in Calgary. Her result, 38.96 seconds. The second in the short sprint was the Canadian Susan Osh. The third place, with the new record for Russia, is for Svetlana Zhurova. Her time, 39.66 seconds. At the World Ski Jumps competitions in the Norwegian Holmenkollen, a tragedy almost occurred. Luckily for the Slovenian athlete Franci Pitike, everything ended successfully. Victory was held by the undisputed leader in the current season, the Austrian Andreas Goldberger. In second place, the Japanese Takanobu Okawa, and in third, Ice Vosflok from Germany. The second level of the Russian Championships of the Rally Frost 95 races ended. In Raminsky, the Taliati racers competed. The best was Alexander Artemenko, Sergei Alyasov. The third and fourth place shared by the Muscovite Arkady Kuznetsov and from Kshely, Alexei Korostilov. In the finals men's tennis tournaments in San Jose, the American Andre Agassi beat his compatriot Michael Chang in 3 sets. Agassi won the first match easily, 6-2. Later, he lost the second with similar ease, 1-6. But in the decisive set, the winner of the Open Australian Championship collected himself and ended the match in his own favor, 6-3. If Pavel Bure was nicknamed the Russian missile in the NHL in the current season, in America there will be a Russian meteorite, possibly. Sergei Fyodorov's game evokes cosmic scale thoughts among the fans across the ocean. In the last match against the LA Kings, Fyodorov scored 4, and the teams parted peacefully 4-4. Good evening. This February isn't spoiling us with the usual clear cold weather, at times rain with snow, at times snow with rain, and yesterday's cooling on the Kola Peninsula in Arhangelsk district and in Karelia. Tomorrow will be replaced by warm weather with snow and blizzards. Temperatures on the Kola Peninsula and in the Arhangelsk district -2 to 7, in Karelia +1 to 3. The reason for that is another Atlantic cyclone. In the Kaliningrad district, the Baltic countries, Belarus and the northwesterly region, it will remain cloudy and damp during the day, +2 to 7. In the Nenes Autonomous District in the Republic of Komi and the Volgovyatsk area, under the influence of an atmospheric front, snow will fall, winds will increase, temperatures from -4 to 7. The central and lower Volga area is also in the zone of that same atmospheric front. It will be cloudy with some precipitation and slippery patches, and -3 to 6 on the lower Volga, -2 to 7. In the central Chernozem area, cloudy weather is expected with some drizzle. Temperatures around 0. In the republics of the Northern Caucasus, the Krasnodar, Stavropol, Remerius, and in the Rostov district, partly cloudy skies. In the Chechen and Ingushian republics, +3 to 6. In Northern Ossetia, Dagestan, +6 to 8 degrees. In the Krasnodar, Stavropol, Remerius, and in the Rostov district, +5 to 10. Around Sochi, as high as +13. Beyond the Caucasus, sunny and warm weather in Georgia and Azerbaijan, +8 to 13. In Armenia, 0, +5. In Ukraine and in Moldova, in an area of high atmospheric pressure, variably cloudy without precipitation. In Ukraine, +5 to 8. In Moldova, +10 to 12 degrees. In Petersburg, cloudy without significant precipitation. At night, 0, -2. During the day, 0, +2. In Moscow, cloudy weather. In the morning, fog. During the day, without significant precipitation. At night, 0, -2. During the day, +1, 3. With icy road conditions. The forecast was compiled on the data of the Oceanic Meteorological Center. Goodbye, all the best.